It began not with applause, but with silence. In a room filled with presidents and prime ministers, a single sentence made history freeze. One Africa, one passport, one currency, one economy. No slogans, no flags, just the steady voice of a young soldier who wasn't supposed to speak. He had no elite education, no IMF ties. He wore no suit, just a uniform. The name was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, and with those words, he shattered decades of protocol, pride, and pretense. Inside the African Union's most guarded chamber, men who had ruled for 30, even 40 years, shifted in their seats. Some stared, others whispered, but no one laughed, because they knew what he was saying, and deep down, they knew it was true. Africa trades with itself less than any other region on Earth. Its borders were drawn in Berlin in 1884 by foreign hands, for foreign gain. Its currencies, still tied to Paris, its policies, still shaped in Washington, its people, still divided by artificial lines. That's not a legacy. That's a cage. And in that moment, Traoré did the unthinkable. He didn't ask for reform. He demanded rupture. No more waiting. No more handshakes in hotel ballrooms. No more pretending that sovereignty means anything if your food, your fuel, and your future are priced in someone else's money. He wasn't asking for permission. He was sounding an alarm. Outside that room, the world kept spinning. Markets stayed open. News anchors stayed silent. But something had changed. A fuse had been lit. And if you've ever wondered whether Africa would rise in your lifetime, this may be the moment. Because what followed wasn't just debate. It was revolt. If you remember where you were when Mandela walked free, when the Berlin Wall fell, when Sankara died, then listen closely. This story belongs beside them. This is the untold battle for Afro Money. The story of how one soldier dared to rewrite the rules drawn in Berlin, and what happened when Africa started to listen. The session was meant to be routine, a closed-door meeting of the African Union, tasked, yet again, with discussing integration. Delegates arrived on time. Briefings were printed. Charts were shown. But behind the numbers, something was deeply wrong. The figures revealed a quiet failure. Intra-African trade, meaning trade between African countries, made up only 15% of the continent's total trade volume. That's about $192 billion exchanged internally, out of over $1.3 trillion by comparison. Europe trades with itself at 70%. Asia, over 50%. Africa, meanwhile, still looked outward, still sold raw goods to the same powers that once claimed its soil by decree, still bought back finished products at triple the cost, and still crossed borders drawn by colonizers who never asked for permission. Then came the proposal. Simple, stark, and to some, dangerous. One Africa, one passport, one currency, one economy. Captain Ibrahim Traoré took the floor, not with ceremony, but with intent. He didn't waste words. He spoke of farmers who lose half their profit paying border fees, of merchants forced to exchange francs, nairas, shillings, and rands in a single day just to move goods 100 miles, of students who need visas to visit neighboring nations, but not Paris, of governments bound by currency pegs to European banks that profit from every transaction they make. Borders, he said, are not just physical, they are fiscal, and they are costing the continent its future. He pointed to a passport initiative launched by the AU in 2016. A symbolic start, he said. That never became real. Less than 10% of member states had adopted it. The rest? Stuck in bureaucracy, protectionism, fear. Then came his sharpest line. The CFA franc is not a currency. It is a leash. Gasps. Murmurs. One minister lowered his head. Another gripped the arms of his chair. Afro Money, Traoré explained, would be backed not by the dollar or euro, but by Africa's own reserves: gold in Mali, oil in Nigeria, cocoa in Ghana, land in Sudan, a sovereign basket, owned and issued by Africans, for Africans. He didn't propose a full rollout. Not yet. He proposed a pilot, a test, a challenge to every African state in the room. Are we ready to stop asking for permission to trade with each other? Some listened with quiet hope, others with barely concealed dread. One delegate from the south, an elder in power longer than Traoré had been alive, whispered to an aide, "He's serious." The aide didn't reply. He didn't need to, because in that moment. Everyone understood. This wasn't a discussion. It was a dare, and within minutes. The cracks began to show. It started with a voice, deep, deliberate, and heavy with experience. A president who had ruled his country for nearly 4 decades leaned into his microphone. His tone was calm, but the words struck like stone. "This is reckless," he said. "A single currency will enslave us to a single authority. We fought too hard for national sovereignty to give it away." The room shifted. Heads nodded. Others frowned. Another delegate rose, this time a finance minister from one of Africa's largest economies. He didn't speak in slogans. He spoke in data. "Our inflation," he warned, "is barely under control. To peg it to weaker economies would collapse it entirely. A unified currency without fiscal alignment is not unity. It's suicide." His words hung in the air. Traoré didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension had already ignited. Then came the noise, low at first, then rising. Debate, murmurs, accusations. A voice shouted from the back row, "Is this Pan-Africanism or militarism?" A chair scraped violently against the floor as a delegate stood, startling aides nearby. Another pulled off his translation headset and tossed it on the table. The chamber fractured, visibly, audibly, irreversibly. Some called Traoré brave, others called him dangerous, but none called him irrelevant. And then, in the middle of the storm, he leaned forward, calm, measured, and said only this: "If unity is dictatorship, then chains must be freedom." Gasps. Silence. No one expected that. The line ricocheted like lightning across the hall. For some, it was sacrilege. For others, revelation. For students in Nairobi, it was spray-painted on campus walls before dawn. In Ouagadougou, candles lit the streets as crowds gathered, repeating the words like scripture. Outside, the press caught whispers of the turmoil, but no one had the full story. Not yet. Western media called it political theater. A Washington think tank labeled Traoré's words emotional populism. But what they missed was the silence that followed, the kind of silence that signals a fault line has moved inside the chamber. A few delegations quietly left their seats, some in protest, some in fear. Their footsteps echoed on the marble, but others stayed, gripping their desks, calculating, listening not just to words, but to the future taking shape. The debate had moved past policy. It was now moral. Was this unity or coercion? Was Afro Money a path forward or a leap into chaos? One thing was clear. The old guard had spoken, but so had something older, the unspoken dream of a continent unchained. And that dream, for the first time, had found a voice with no hesitation. The debate could have ended there, in rhetoric, in protest, in walkouts. But then, a new voice asked for the floor, and the tide turned. The Nigerian delegation stood, slowly, deliberately, in a chamber divided. Every eye turned to them. Nigeria, with over 220 million people, the continent's largest economy, its largest population, the only African nation with a GDP strong enough to tip the scale. The room held its breath. Then came the statement, "We will not ignore the call for Afro Money." The minister said, "Nigeria is prepared to join a pilot program to test the feasibility of a shared African currency." No flourish, no drama, just a quiet line that shook the chamber to its core. Half the room erupted in applause. Others sat stunned. Some rushed to shake hands. The map had changed. Because Nigeria's support wasn't symbolic. It was structural. Economists had warned, if Nigeria moves, others will follow. And that's exactly what happened. Within an hour, corridors buzzed with calculations. Delegations from smaller landlocked nations began conferring. Could this be their exit from dependency? Their entry into a new bloc? In contrast, business elites from Dar es Salaam to Abidjan sounded alarms. Too fast, they warned. Too risky. Central banks issued guarded statements. Opposition leaders in pro-Western governments demanded answers. But in the streets, the people moved faster than politics. In Abuja, students sang "One Africa, One Money" outside Parliament. In Bamako and Accra, rallies erupted, banners reading "Afro Money sécurise African freedom." Even traders at dusty border markets began asking, what would it mean to be paid once, in one currency, without losing profits to exchange tables? For them, this wasn't theory. It was bread, medicine, school fees, dignity, in the African Union chamber. The aftershock lingered. Delegates who had once scowled now shifted in their seats. Could they oppose a vision backed by Nigeria and supported by their own youth? Then, another ripple. Ghana, a nation long known for its cautious diplomacy, requested the floor. The representative stood, holding no flag, no fanfare. He read from a prepared page. "We cannot forget history. We cannot ignore risk. But we also cannot deny that the colonial legacy of Berlin has bound us too long. Ghana will commit to a continental task force to design Afro Money within the next 12 months. He wasn't aligning blindly. He wasn't pledging currency union overnight. He was pledging action, resources, expertise, political will. That signal hit harder than any slogan. By the next morning, radio stations across West Africa declared, "The tide is turning." Commentators called it the most significant shift in Pan-African politics since the days of Kwame Nkrumah, in Mali and Burkina Faso. Murals of Traoré appeared overnight, beside Mandela, Sankara, Lumumba, in Lagos. Students gathered for candlelight vigils on the walls of Nairobi universities. Someone wrote, "Afro Money is not just currency, it's memory, erased and reclaimed." For the first time in decades, African unity was no longer a poem. It was policy, slow, uncertain, but real. And now, the world began to notice. The headlines arrived fast, and they were not subtle. France shaken by Afro Money declaration. Nigeria breaks ranks with the West. Africa challenges the monetary order. In Paris, emergency meetings were held inside the Ministry of Economy. The CFA franc, once considered untouchable, now looked vulnerable. Editorials called Nigeria's move a reckless gamble, but the tone beneath the outrage was fear. For decades, the CFA franc had tethered African economies to Paris, a system of convertibility, reserves, and influence. Now, with Afro Money on the table, that tether was being cut, and Paris knew it. In London, analysts at the Financial Times warned that Afro Money could tilt commodity markets. Europe imports nearly 20% of its raw materials from Africa. If those resources shifted into a new currency backed by gold, cobalt, and land, instead of euros or dollars, trade leverage would weaken. In Washington, the reaction was sharper. At a closed policy roundtable, a senior analyst put it bluntly, "If Afro Money succeeds, Africa will no longer be a recipient of aid. It will be a bloc, one with bargaining power." So, The shift posed both opportunity and risk for the U.S. A unified Africa could mean new markets, but also less influence over individual states. The State Department remained cautious. The Treasury Department grew worried. Wall Street was watching closely. Analysts flagged one critical point. Africa holds some of the world's largest reserves of cobalt, lithium, platinum, materials vital to modern tech. If those begin trading in Afro money, demand for the dollar could weaken. One economist warned, the question isn't whether Afro money is strong on day one, it's whether it's irreversible. Even in Beijing. State media took note. Commentators suggested Afro money could eventually align with China's push to internationalize the yuan. The possibility of an Africa-China bloc trading outside the Western system no longer sounded theoretical. And then came the cultural shift. Diaspora youth in Paris marched with banners. Our currency, our future. Black students in Washington debated whether Afro money was the economic equivalent of the civil rights movement. For the first time, Africa wasn't just reacting to global trends, it was setting one. The chamber emptied slowly that night, but the echo of Traoré's words remained. We do not ask for permission to be free. We have risen to claim it. In Bamako, someone etched the line into concrete. In Kigali, a teacher wrote it on the blackboard. In Johannesburg, a grandmother whispered it to her grandson. Afro money had not been born. No notes had been printed. No bank yet stood to issue it. And yet, something deeper had already been minted. Belief. For the first time since Berlin 1884 carved up a continent without consent, Africans were daring to imagine erasing those lines, not with violence, not with vengeance, but with vision. Not everyone agreed. In Abidjan and Dakar, officials warned of sanctions, capital flight, economic chaos. Bankers feared the collapse of reserves held in Paris. Veterans of old systems clung to what they knew. But outside those offices, the world had changed. Because this story was no longer just about currency. It was about dignity, about memory, about a generation refusing to inherit division. And so we ask you, what happens next? Will Afro money survive the weight of global resistance and internal fear? Will the vision of Traoré, now joined by Nigeria and Ghana, become a roadmap or a relic? Or will this moment, so fragile, so full of promise, be quietly buried like so many others? That answer belongs not just to presidents, it belongs to teachers, to merchants, to parents, to you. If this story reminds you of a hope once lost, share it. If it echoes something your family once dreamed of, speak it. If you believe that a continent has the right to stand united, not by force, but by choice, remember this moment, because the next time Africa redraws its lines, it may not be at a table in Europe, it may be by the hands of its own people. And if that happens, it will not begin with applause, it will begin with silence. And then, history. God bless Africa.